Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Odyssey House Journals. This is our first podcast for 2021. So, my co-host is Rachel Santizo. Are you ready for the new year?
I'm so ready for the new year. Excited to put 2020 behind me.
Everybody in the world is. And the other thing I'm looking forward to is that we will get to move at some time, we will get to move into our new studio so that we don't have to Zoom all our guests and each other.
That will be magical. I can't wait for that moment.
You're not wearing your mask right now. What's going on?
I'm not. It's because I'm sitting at home in the luxury. I'm sitting in the luxury of my own home, speaking with you on Zoom. That's why.
Which we have been. What are you looking forward to most in 2021?
Well, for me personally, I'm looking forward to graduating college. That's like my main goal for the year. And so, yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to.
And I saw your grades for the last, quarter or semester, and they were all
A's.
yes.
I'm very happy about it.
Thank
you. Thank you.
This podcast is basically a raw and uncensored podcast dealing with the issues of addiction and recovery. And we've had a great variety of guests on, from law enforcement experts to recovering addicts to recovering alcoholics like me, or you're in recovery as well. So, and you've arranged our guest today. And so if you want to introduce her, have at it.
Oh, I was thinking about how to properly introduce this woman because there's not enough words. And so the word that I came up for her today is brave. She's so incredibly brave. And so we are interviewing Heather Coates, and she has this incredible story that everyone needs to hear. And so without further ado, Heather Coates.
Come on down, Heather. Hey, magically.
Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm spectacular.
You're in your house like the rest of everyone, right?
I work from home, so yeah, this is where the magic happens.
You gotta. Yeah, we were talking before we started recording this, Heather, and Rachel pointed out you're in a gamer's chair.
Yeah, this is a gaming chair.
And then show us the keyboard.
Guilty as charged. Oh yeah, this is a
oh my gosh.
But for the audience, she said she's going to give it to me because I mean so much to her. So I just want to put it on video before we start.
The funny thing is I don't game. Okay, I just have gamer accessories. There's something about a mechanical keyboard that is very satisfying versus the like the membrane keyboard.
Yeah,
so this is like that old school oh. I shouldn't be pushing keys when I'm.
You clicked off for a second.
Yeah, because I hit the space bar. Sorry.
So Rachel, why'd you ask Heather to be on the podcast today?
Oh, this is going to be a good show, and I like how you introduced the rawness that we bring to this podcast because Heather is willing to share her story, and she has so much that the community needs to hear. For those that have lived through it, that are currently going through it, or like I wear my Soap to Hope shirt in case you want to give back to nonprofit organizations that are involved in this. So first, Heather, the stuff that we're going to be talking about, I just want to let you know that I love and honor you, and it's super important information, and it makes me love you more, especially your bravery to come and share this stuff. So I want to make that very clear before we start. But one of the big topics that I would love to start with is that you used to be a sex worker, and I would love to hear more about this and kind of bring light to this to the community.
Yeah. So I remember, when I first became homeless, and I became homeless as the result of drug use and like an unchecked addiction, right? Like I didn't know what that was. Like originally it was alcohol, and I got sober from alcohol, and I stayed sober for a few years, but it was like just abstinence. I didn't have recovery, and I didn't know that it was like a thing that I needed to manage, right? And so I started drinking again, then I got into heroin, I know that's like a weird jump but I got into drugs and like, anyway, I became homeless. And the thing is, like, when I was first homeless, I'd never been homeless before, right? I'd never even been close to that. Like with alcohol, I was able to maintain a job and a home, mortgage, whatever. And so that's another reason I didn't think I was really an addict or an alcoholic, because, my house looked good and my job looked good. And it doesn't really matter. I'm drinking a liter of vodka a day. You know what I mean?
Just a liter?
Well, it ended up getting to like most of a half gallon, actually, is what I kind of maxed out at. And I'm a small person. Yeah. But so anyway, I was just like out in the streets, and I didn't know what I was doing. I had no connection to that life at all. Like I was just like trying to stay warm, and I was trying to, you know what I mean? And so I was unsheltered for probably like the first, I don't even know, I'm going to say like maybe only like a week, couple weeks, like maybe a week, not that long.
Were
Down
you
on Rio Grande?
Was I what?
Were you down on Rio Grande?
You know what? I wasn't. I was more up. My spot was more like near on State Street, like where the Zion and the Alta and the Wasatch motels are. That's because I didn't know North Temple, because I used drugs, and I had like a dealer. I had a bougie heroin situation when I first started. I had a home in Woods Cross, and I had a girl that would bring the drugs to me. I mean, and I was spending a lot of money. My husband and I were both working, somehow maintaining for a very short time. And of course I lost all that. He was in prison within like a year of like trying that drug. He was in prison and I was outside, you know what I mean? But so I didn't know where to go. I didn't know where the spots were. So I was just wherever. So I'm just roaming State Street, just like I found little side hustles. I finally found someone that took a chance on me with drugs. They were going to let me like sell little small dime bags, and anyway. But what happened is I met this girl, and she was a sex worker, and I think I bought drugs from her or sold drugs to her. I can't remember how we met. And then she like offered for me to stay in her room, and then I got to see like what was happening for her, like, because she managed on Backpage. She didn't have a pimp. She didn't, you know what I mean? She just like would market herself on Backpage, which I don't think that exists anymore. And I watched her, and I was out there doing my little stupid, like I would steal from Home Depot and I would return that, and then I would get a gift card, and then I would sell that to somebody for 50 cents on the dollar. You know what I mean? Like I had little stuff like that. But I watched her, and like in my mind, well, first of all, I was never going to do that. Like to me, that was just like, that was so crazy. Like there's no way in the world I'm going to do that. Right. And it was kind of like every boundary I crossed with myself made it easier for me to, to just kind of railroad through the rest, because like there's a lot of things I was never going to do. I was never going to steal. I was never going to use a needle. I was never going to, you know what I mean? Like I was never going to do all these things. Well, so basically I just got to see like how easy it was for her. And I know that sounds crazy because, it's not, I mean, I could never do it now. It's not easy, but when it comes to like having a substance addiction that you can't work and you don't have a way to feed it, and I got to see this girl always had a room, always. She always had drugs, and I didn't see the ugly side of it, right? I just saw that stuff, and I was like, oh, well, maybe, like I could, and so she kind of showed me what's up, you know what I mean? She kind of trained me, like showed me the ropes, like gave me tips, and showed me how to build my own Backpage, and how to how to deal with the Johns, and like what to
and so of course Backpage is actually where you can search for it on the internet, right? Versus
Backpage is like it's no longer, I think it's gone now, but it was like basically a place where you could, it was for like personal ads or classified ads, I think is what it was original, but like literally Backpage is like for prostitutes, you know what I mean? Like it was just like an easier way that we could like market ourselves and meet Johns without having to walk the street or whatever. And I'm lucky I never had to do that. I never had to walk, I never had to be someone that had to jump in cars. I did do that when I was desperate. I did do that sometimes. And it was terrifying. Like that was way scarier to me somehow, because I felt more controlled bringing them into my room
Right.
than going into their car, you know? But yeah, so, but basically a lot of what allowed me, I feel like, to just like where I didn't give a fuck about myself. And I got to a point where I wasn't even scared anymore. You know what I mean? Especially after you get beat up or you get assaulted, you know, and eventually, there's just so many things that you'll start to allow for that. And I think a lot of that came from like, cause my ex-husband, the one that I got into the drugs with, that was like a domestic violence situation. And I think that 13 years of living in that abusive marriage, I think it just kind of like the trauma of that or whatever, it kind of just depleted my ability to care.
And I think there's some parts to it that people just don't understand, right? Like when it comes to domestic violence, like when I was in those situations, when I got hit or when he would do things to me, that's when I felt like I was important or that he loved me, is when he would do things. And I think that that's like the things that we don't talk about. It's not that I wanted to be in them, but it's just, that's where you're at and that's how it controls you.
Oh yeah, no, I 100%, like he could do all these terrible, awful things to me, right? And then like this one thing that was nice or that was like, and I'd just be like, oh, and like you said, even if he came home and he was like abusive to me, at least he was home.
Right.
Or like he'd disappear for days and then I'd be like, he'd come home and I wouldn't be mad. I'd be like, oh, I'm so glad you're home. Like, it was like very, now I look back and I'm like, holy shit, like how could I, but when you're in it, you're in it. You don't.
Let me ask you how, I'm trying to figure out the time frame here. You go from living a normal life in a Davis County suburb to being an alcoholic, to being a heroin addict, to being a hooker. How long did that go?
Randall, I ask myself that sometimes. I'm like, what in the hell? Yeah. I didn't get into heroin until I was 35. Like what? Anyway, yeah. So, a lot of that, like, so, in my childhood, my parents divorced when I was really young, and my mom, she kind of just took off. She came back, but like, she's never, I hope she doesn't hear this, but anyway, she's never, she's not maternal, and I love my mom. We have a great relationship now, but like, as a child, like I always just was like seeking her approval, seeking her, and I was very codependent. I became very codependent because of that relationship. So I was addicted to people well before I was alcohol or drugs, right? And my first husband was an alcoholic, still is an active alcoholic. And I hated it because he was an alcoholic, right? So I didn't really drink. When my older kids were younger, I didn't. And then when I divorced him, my second husband, the one that was, abusive, he was also an alcoholic, but somehow he made it look more glamorous because he had a lot of money. You know what I mean? And like mimosas for breakfast was okay. And Bloody Marys for breakfast was okay. You know what I mean? Like he had the ability to support that lifestyle. And so it was like, oh, somehow I just like, and then I became, addicted to alcohol. And then in 2007, I went to treatment and I left him. I got away from him. I think we'd been together for like 3 years. And it was my first taste of like, this is not okay. I didn't know what about it was not okay. But it's like, he's a narcissist in that, like in the true sense. Like I'm not just, I know that's loosely thrown around, but like literally if I were to look at, like SAMHSA's description of narcissistic personality disorder, this person definitely has all the boxes checked. And so a lot of what was happening with me was like this, I knew it was bad. It's kind of like when you go back to drugs, even though you don't want to do it again, you know that you don't want to do it. And then suddenly you're doing it again. You're like, how the fuck did this happen? I wasn't going to drink again. I wasn't going to use it again. So that's how it was with him. So that was all kind of tangled together. And I did get sober in 2007. And like I said, I stayed sober for about 4 years, had a son with that husband in that time period. And yeah, we before the Woods Cross House, we had a home on 2 acres in Farmington. We had 401ks and Harley Davidsons and blah blah blah. But I wasn't in recovery. I was just literally abstinent. And my life, in retrospect, I was miserable. You know what I mean? Like now, like I got my little shitty 2-bedroom apartment and I drive a a 2001 Toyota Corolla. And I'm like, hell yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. So anyway, so he introduced me to heroin, my husband, because he had used opiates like years prior, and he kind of replaced it with alcohol. Like he hadn't used opiates. But when we started drinking again, he introduced me to heroin, and I was like, oh, I kind of like this, you know. And I had an incident where I stopped breathing as a result of drinking and then using heroin on top of that. And my son at the time, he was 2 at the time, he was home because the paramedics, they had to take me away, you know, in an ambulance. So then DCFS got involved in my life. And once that happened, that was pretty much, I wasn't even addicted to heroin at that time. I was using it very, very infrequently, but I was drinking, and my blood alcohol content was high enough that when I smoked that heroin, it just caused me to have pulmonary suppression. So I wasn't actually addicted to heroin at that point. But as soon as my son was taken, then it's almost like I just, because no one had given me an answer. Like if I would have known about like the Odyssey Parents Program at that time,
Right.
I would have done that. I would have done that. But nobody in that, and I'm not sliding DCFS, but that nobody in that organization, nobody said to me, hey, you have this disease and you need to work on it in order to get your son back. No, they just said, you need to pass these UAs and you need to, you know what I mean? And like, that wasn't enough because I had this unchecked addiction, you know, and most of it was like alcohol. I would, you know, the heroin thing kind of just started gradually slipping in. And then as soon as I like lost him, like he was adopted out, that's when I really started just like using drugs, and I didn't care anymore, you know? So yeah, it's like so weird. It's basically just like, had I gotten recovery in 2007 when I first went to treatment, then maybe, you know what I mean? I would have just, you know, but that whole life I was living was just a lie. You know what I mean? I had money, yeah, and I had nice things, but I was in a very dark place, you know? And so I feel like it was only a matter of time that I got into substance really heavy, because it's the only way to cope with that, you know, narcissistic abuse, you know what I mean? Where you're being gaslighted and you're being, you know, constantly, you know, messed with mentally. So does that answer your question? That was a lot, I know.
Yeah, sort of. Isn't it sort of scary to advertise yourself on Backpage? You have a stranger getting a hold of you, and you're going to exchange sex for money, maybe even if it's in your room under your terms, but you've got a bunch of weird guys just coming out of nowhere. That's scary.
I mean, now that I look back at it, I mean, it is so terrifying. Like when I've gone out and done outreach for I did it for about 8 months with Stoke to Hope, right? And I would go to those places where I used to live, you know what I mean? And see these girls and just be like, oh, like just terrified for them. But when I was in it, I wasn't scared because it was necessary. It was like what I needed to do to get the drugs, and to, because I was just kind of like it was almost like I was on so when I lost my one son, my older 2 kids, I just abandoned them because I thought, well, I'm not a mom anymore, obviously. And so I just lost the very thing that I thought made me who I am, and that's a mother, was gone. So I was like, well, I don't, you know, so Randall, I really wasn't scared. I mean, there were certain dudes, there were times, yes, where I was like, this is not good. Well, I forgot to add too, that for about a 9-month chunk of that time that I was doing sex work, my husband he was the one that was helping me do that. Wow. So he would the dude would come in the room, he'd give me the money, and then my husband would be standing outside that door, and I'd hand him the money through the door so he could go buy drugs. So, you know, when I was doing that, like I felt like I was protected by this person, you know what I mean? Because the guy would know he was out there, you know, so they were like, okay. Or we would lie. A lot of us that were out there alone, we would act like we had some sort of bodyguard in the next room. Yeah. You know, like we'd set up like a little thing where at least this is what I would do. Like I would have like one of the other girls that I worked with, you know, I would act like I was calling the bodyguard, be like, okay, so he's here, you know, so in an hour, if the dude's not leaving, you know, come knock on the door, and you know what I mean? So it was just a way to keep them at their time frame, their 1 hour that they paid for or whatever, you know, but also just so they knew that there was someone that could, you know. But yeah, it's such a risky, I mean, I think about, and I've been held at gunpoint, I've been taken hostage, you know what I mean? Like I've had but at the time, you know, on drugs, like it wasn't even that crazy to me to have like a gun pointed. I mean, now I'm like, oh my God, like, oh, that's so insane. But I was so depleted, you know what I mean? Spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically. I just didn't have it to care.
What would you say? So going out to the motels, with Soap to Hope and some like nonprofit organizations that give back to individuals that were, like us, like what does that do for you? Or what would you say when you see that young girl in there starting down the same path that you were on? Like, what would you say?
Ooh, that's crazy. That just gave me goosebumps. I call
Mhm.
that I call those truth tingles, by the way, when I get truth tingles.
Yeah.
Because that's powerful. Like so I haven't done Soap to Hope for a little while because like I was working at Odyssey Lighthouse and like because of all the COVID stuff, like I mean, they weren't telling us we couldn't go and do stuff, but it was I didn't feel right about it being
Right.
that I'm coming in from, you know what I mean? I didn't want to be, so I was being very strict about my exposure to the public because I didn't think it was fair to the clients, you know what I mean? So I stopped doing Soap to Hope, but for that 8-9 months that I was doing it, so like I was a little freaked out. I've known January a long time, and when I heard that she was doing this, I was really interested, but I gave myself a 1-year sobriety time to even do it because I didn't feel I didn't want to put myself in any kind of like, you know what I mean, risky situation. And so I told her, I was like, look, the second I get my year, I'm coming out with you, and I'll tell you, like, I've had so many, I mean, sometimes it's just handing out bags, but that's cool. I like that. But I've had so many, I'm sure you have too, Rachel, so many experiences where, well, first of all, girls that knew me that I used to work with, and they're like, how did you get out? Like, you can get out, you know what I mean? Like this one girl, she like, I saw her and I did barely recognize her because she was, not well. And she saw me and she said, and I was just like, oh my God. And I just grabbed her by her shoulders and I was like, girl, like, and she just said, so what are you? I told her I was working Odyssey. I told her that, like just that how long I'd been clean, sober. And she was just like, what? She's like, how did you get out of this? And I said, listen, we can, and I just told her, I said, we have the resources to get you out of here. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do it right now. Like, that's another thing, that pressuring people, like, you got to go to treatment right now. You got to go to, like, that's too fast. Because when you're in that, especially like that's what's too, sometimes it's too fast when you're just in active addiction. But when you're in sex work and you're like ingrained in that lifestyle, it's very quick. Like, you can't just be like, okay, let's go, because there's so much, it's, you know what I mean? It's kind of like a domestic violence situation. When you try to just yank somebody out of there, you gotta kind of work slowly with
When
people.
it's comfortable to them, and the one thing that's lacked is trust. There's no trust. And so even
Absolutely.
if she's before and you're going into her space, it's
Right.
still kind of like, well, wait, what do you want? What are you doing? Like, you have to earn that. Like,
Yes, and so that's why that Soap to Hope model is so it works so well, because it's like, so it starts out with, here's some toothpaste and some shampoo and some soap and a nice and a note that tells you that you matter, you're not forgotten. And that just like opens that door of trust, right? And then the next week you see me again, and here you go, here's some hygiene. I'm not trying to even have a conversation with you necessarily, just
right.
here you go, what do you need? And then so like I've had conversations with girls that, like, they're like, I had this girl one time, we had bags of clothes, and I was like trying to help her like hold it open, and she's going through it, and then she looks up at me and she's like, God, you probably think I'm like super pathetic, like I'm over here just like digging through all these clothes. And she's like, she probably think it's crazy that I've had everything stolen. And I said, girl, I used to live at this motel. This was at the Gateway. I said, I used to live at this motel and I would have my things stolen every other day. Like, you know what I mean? You can't hang on to anything out here. And I said, and also, like, I like shared with her, then she's like, you used to live here. And I just said, yeah, I did. I said, so I said, I'm out here because I don't judge you. Like, that's the last thing I do. You know what I mean? I've had some really powerful experiences being able to give back to that community. And what I would say, basically, I think the main thing to say, and I think that when doing the outreach, we would do that, but it's just to like let them know that like you are not damaged goods. You know what I mean? You are not like this job that you're doing, it's out of necessity. And you know what I mean? It's in my opinion, it was easier for me it was better for me than selling drugs or stealing from Home Depot, or, you know what I mean? Because it gave me independence out there. I always had a place to stay. And I know it sounds crazy to, but it really, and so to be able to like, let them know that that they're not damaged goods, and that no matter what they choose, you know what I mean? Like letting them know that there are people that are there and that care, you know what I mean? Because I know my mom could have texted me every day being like, well, I'll get you an apartment. I'll send you to treatment, none of it. No, because in my mind, I was beyond saving. I was beyond repair. This was my life, period, the end. And I was going to die that way. And so I think just offering little pieces of, and in my mind, like that, going out there and just telling people they matter and they're not forgotten, that's harm reduction.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that is if you can just add that little bit of like humanity to that population, I think it's really valuable,
Heather, we have about 3 minutes left. And the one
Okay.
thing we haven't covered, we've talked about all this bad stuff.
Oh,
How'd you finally get clean, and what are you doing now?
okay. So I'll make it quick. No, so I ended up going to jail, like for like the last time I ever went to jail. And actually Rachel, I was exposed to Miss Santizo in the Salt Lake County jail. And I was like, and FTR was like, I'm like, what is this? Because when I got sober in 2007, it was just AA and NA, and you know what I mean? Like you didn't have like what millions of other things we have now, right? And so I was like, what? And so it was like, and I heard her story, and it was like very inspiring, because I was like, wait a minute, so that means I can change. That means I can do this. And so then like I was introduced to AA, and I went to treatment. I went to IOP. I did like an outpatient, and I did sober living out of jail. I was fortunate enough to have a family member help me with that. And I was able to work on my trauma. I did a lot of EMDR and a lot of trauma work while in treatment, worked on my codependency, like all the stuff, right? And then I also got a sponsor in AA, and I worked the 12 steps, and I continue to work, you know what I mean? I practice those principles in all my affairs to this day, and I go to meetings, I go to meetings 3 times a week, or more if I need it. I sponsor women. I stay in contact with my sponsor. I mean, AA is pretty much I needed to work on my trauma and all that stuff. Uh-oh.
Did you hit the space bar?
I didn't mean to. I was talking with my hands too much.
You're back.
So anyway, I needed to kind of work on that trauma of like losing my son, the sex work, the domestic violence, all of that stuff. But then the AA thing is like, that's my bread and butter. You know what I mean? That's like where my heart lies.
So I want to point out just 2 things before, because since we're almost done, you had something like, and this makes me want to cry even thinking about it, but you had something happen over the holiday with your son.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it's important to bring that up, because
right, yeah. So I had so I was able to, so I have a little over 2 years, and I did my amends, my 9th step amends a while back, but I had one amends that I didn't want to do right then, and that was to my sister-in-law, who has my son. My son was adopted by my brother and my sister-in-law, and I have not seen them or him in 6 years because of that whole situation. So I felt confident, like 3 months ago, to make that amends to her and to thank her for taking my son, because I resented her forever, and it was like this big thing. And now, through this process of working the steps, I do not resent her. I have so much gratitude, and anyway, so I made those amends, and it was really powerful. She just was thanking me and like, sobbing. Well, anyway, so then she was like, well, then it like all of a sudden it opened up that I could maybe see him at Thanksgiving, which that didn't end up happening because of COVID. Nobody got together. And then on Christmas, also we didn't get together, but we did like a Zoom thing, like, open our Christmas gifts. And so I got to see him and like, interact with him a little bit, you know what I mean? And so he was 4 when I lost him. I haven't seen him in 6 years. And so that was the first time. So yeah, and that's like a gift of this recovery stuff. And I should also mention that I started a nonprofit with my friend Austin, Dance Recovery Vibe. Used to be Dance with Sobriety, now it's Recovery Vibe. We teach dance classes to people in treatment centers and just in general recovery, but I should have mentioned that. Oh well.
And the point of that is to let people know that they can have fun sober.
Yeah. Oh, so much fun. I have way more fun sober than I ever did. Yeah.
Well, that's really cool, Rachel, that she met you in jail and you were telling your story.
Yeah.
And now all 3 of us are sober.
Yeah. And the funny part is that I saw her when she brought in AA literature to FTR. That's when we reconnected.
That's funny. Yeah, I was the literature chair. So I
Yep.
was taking literature around.
But people don't understand that there is this huge recovery community, and we all interact with each other in different ways through an AA or Soap to Hope, or working at a treatment center, or doing a podcast like this. So you're very brave to come on this podcast and share this with everyone. And I hope more people, more outsiders, more what in AA we call them normies, or
Yes.
more normal people would see this, so they have an understanding of why people go through what they go through. And that's the point of this podcast. And we should mention that it's available on, you can watch it on YouTube, or you can listen to it on iTunes, Spotify, or iHeart. All you got to do is Google Odyssey House Journals. So,
Okay, cool.
so spread the news, okay?
Yeah, I will.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks,
Thank
Rachel.
you, Heather.
Thank you,
Bye,
guys.
Rachel.
Thanks everyone for watching. Have a good day.
You too.